All right, let me, I'll record on my end as well. Okay. All right, so last we left off, we were gonna look at data to see on a consequentialist view how inefficacy objections play out. The only data that actually tried to assign a number to hitting a threshold was one paper that Ans actually pointed out to me, with a probability of 1/900 per purchase of a chicken. We calculated it out for an average consumer, and that would result in 900 chickens being killed. Now, after contacting the author, really that number is somewhere between 1 and 900 chickens. When we calculate it out over a lifetime, an average consumer has about a 92% chance of resulting in 1 to 900 chickens being killed. A relatively lower consumer has around, I think it was around a 70-something% chance, and then a very low consumer has around like a 20-something% chance of somewhere anywhere between 1 and 900 chickens on that, on those estimates. Do we agree or disagree on those estimates?
Yeah, we agree with that. We also talked about how, in terms of the calculation, it could come out to as the figure could be as small as just one less bird bred, correct?
Yeah, 1 to 900, anywhere between 1 and 900.
Yeah.
Okay. And now the question at this point is just, given that that's the case, on a consequentialist view, would that be a bad thing? Is that the question?
Yeah, exactly. So I guess, sorry, what I wanted to just point out was, first of all, there was some contention last time as to whether or not the purchaser who isn't on the threshold has any moral responsibility on the consequentialist view, right? There was a little bit of debate on that. So just to clarify your position, do we agree that according to the consequentialist view, at least, the individual who's not on the threshold would not have any moral responsibility here?
On a utilitarian view, I like to use the word utilitarian instead of consequentialist because I think it's more accurate.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah. On a utilitarian view, if it is not the case that if the individual had not done that action, the results would have been the same in terms of utility, then I agree a utilitarian wouldn't consider that relevant.
Right. So I'm just, from the McConnell paper that I sent you, right, just on page 26, they actually talk about this, which is why I brought it up. So they state, and I'm quoting, "A choice to not buy a chicken will not prevent the grocer from ordering more chickens that day," right, if the individual isn't on the threshold. So,
yeah.
Okay, so we agree on that point.
Yeah. No, I agree on that point. But yeah. The point of contention is that over if someone decides to engage in this lifestyle, an average consumer has over a 90% chance of killing anywhere between 1 and 900 chickens.
Right. And so regarding that point, I guess the other thing I wanted to bring up is, you'd agree that from the consequentialist position standpoint, the relevant metric here is not the fact that they make the purchase and an order is like renewed from the integrator to the producer, but rather, had they not made that threshold purchase, how many fewer birds would have been bred, right, during in total? And so that's the relevant metric from the consequentialist.
Yeah. From the utilitarian. Yeah.
From the utilitarian. Okay, that's fine. Yeah. So I guess we agree on that point. I guess now the question just is, from the standpoint of a utilitarian, non-vegan or vegan, is that number 1 in 900 going to make a difference to them in terms of how they calculate, I guess, positive utility generation? And also, based on what we see in terms of the broiler chicken industry, what would that number likely be if we can estimate that? Would it be closer to 900 or closer to the lower side, which is what I would say is most likely to be the case?
Yeah, I mean, even if it's lower, I mean, even if it is lower to the on the lower side, let's say it's like 40 or 50 or something. Yeah, I think it would be crazy to say that it wouldn't be that wouldn't be meaningful on a utilitarian view. I mean, it's just it's just what utilitarianism is. It's just a concern for utility that would have been otherwise. So this is especially true, I would actually add, in the case of chickens, because chickens are probably the worst farm animal in terms of treatment. They are grown, almost 99% of them are grown in factory farms. They're in battery cages. They are debeaked without anesthetics. They suffer from limb fractures because of how they're bred, such that they outgrow their own weight to support themselves. I mean, the list just goes on. So, I mean, if this were the case in humans, if we were breeding humans, and you had living this lifestyle would give you even if it was like 40 or 50 humans, you had like a 90% chance or something to torture and kill 40 to 50 humans because you live this lifestyle. Would that be just an irrelevancy on utilitarianism? I don't think so. I think a utilitarian would say, no, it's actually the better thing to do here is to not engage in that lifestyle.
Yeah, so okay, I agree with I don't have any disagreement in terms of how you describe the the broiler chicken industry. Regarding the point of how a utilitarian would calculate this, I think it's going to depend on that individual's preferences, right? I mentioned that there were some pieces that I had read where utilitarians, at least non-vegan utilitarians, say they'd be willing to bite the bucket on a few hundred chickens. One is Andrew Chignell, and he's responding to Singer, and he actually says, even if the threshold purchase was a couple hundred or a few hundred chickens, that's a drop in the bucket. That's not my position. I'm just pointing out this is going to depend on utilitarians' own personal set of preferences. So for certain vegan,
wait a minute, Ants. There's a distinction between you saying whether a utilitarian would care about it and whether it would be of concern on a utilitarian view, right? Right. So look, utilitarianism is just it's a fairly straightforward normative theory. The normative theory is just that we ought do what maximizes utility.
Right. And I'm saying certain utilitarians I'm pointing out, and I have some papers where they say this, they would weight their own, I suppose, experiences of consuming, of a lifetime of purchasing and consuming certain products, and then weigh that against, the cost or the disutility of, say, one or two or three or just a few additional broiler chickens bred over that lifetime as a result of their decisions. And how they weighted that is, I think, going to depend on how they calculate the difference there. So I don't know if we can actually say. I think you wanted to say that on all utilitarians. I think when we spoke, you would guess that they would generally have a problem with that in terms of even if it was just one less bird bred over their lifetime. And I'm simply pointing out, I don't know if that's actually the case, right? It's going to depend.
Yeah, I think most. I mean, look, whether most utilitarians do or not would be irrelevant to the topic. The topic would be just, does it follow on a utilitarian view? It would just be, you could ask the epistemic question, like, does someone's utility pleasure of consuming this flesh or whatever outweigh the tortuous existence that you're causing these individuals? And likely, I don't think it's going to be one. Even if it's closer to the one, I don't think it's going to be exactly one or two or three. It'll probably, if I had to like gun to the head, if even if we go to the lower end, like 20, 30, 40, I just don't see the difference. Like if you ask we could just ask the utilitarians who would think otherwise, like, is this something they would accept in the human context? That's all. Just, do you think that utility would be greater if you were eating human flesh and you had this lifestyle of eating human flesh and you had a 90% plus chance of killing and torturing 20, 30, 40 humans because you live that lifestyle?
No, I'm sure most of them would argue that the suffering on the human view is going to be qualitatively different from that of a chicken, right? And then,
so let's say they're mentally handicapped humans,
right? So if we're doing name the trait, which is what. So if you control for cognitive capacity, right, and you specify beings, let's say separate species, but they have the cognitive capacity of a broiler chicken, so severely mentally disabled beings, part of a separate species that are being bred.
I don't know if how severely that would be, but I mean, sure. I mean, it would. I agree, it would be severely handicapped, but there are certainly plenty of, when we say severely handicapped, my intuition tells me that we're maybe thinking of cases that are more handicapped than that of even broiler chickens. But I wouldn't just so there's this weird thing people try to do where they say like severely handicapped and they try to like make it this little speck of sentience or something like that. Like, no, not really. Like, chickens are actually fairly intelligent individuals. And their capacity to suffer is not minuscule at all.
No, I understand that. I'm just saying the cognitive capacity, let's say, of a chicken, whatever that is, it doesn't have to be severely, mentally disabled. So, I mean, if you have those type of beings, let's say in a possible world, and they're being
those
bred,
type of humans, those type of humans.
Right. Well, I'm saying beings that look like humans, but let's say they're part of a separate species. I'm just saying that so then you don't have to.
Wait. Unless you're naming species as one of the traits, I don't see why we're making the species different. The very question was they're humans. They're humans, and they have the cognitive capacity of a chicken, such that they can experience the same utility and disutility of a chicken. I also don't see how the species is relevant on a utilitarian view, because utilitarianism just cares about the utility or disutility. Doesn't place intrinsic value on a species. Yeah,
that's fine. I was specifying the trait that I would point to. So I was just saying cognitive capacity of a chicken as, say, existing as a species norm. I mean, if you want to call those beings humans, that's fine. But I'm just saying.
Let's say they are humans. Let's say they're humans, but we just select for the mentally handicapped ones such that their ability to experience utility and disutility each one is at the par of a chicken.
Right. So I'm saying if you had two possible worlds, in one possible world you had that scenario, but everything else between the worlds was controlled for, I don't see the utilitarian, the one who would bite the bullet on that, is going to be in the same position, right? The moral evaluation won't change. Right. So I mean that's what I was pointing out.
Yeah, but what's the answer? Do you think, like, I'm just asking you, like, do you think on a utilitarian view that an individual is not doing a bad thing by eating mentally handicapped human flesh if this industry existed to farm mentally handicapped humans?
I mean, I'm not a utilitarian, but as a utilitarian, it would come down to entirely, the calculation of net suffering versus net utility. I think. I mean,
that's trivially true, right? I mean, of course it is, but that's not the question I was asking. I'm not asking like what it would come down to. I'm asking, do you think it would come down to that? Like, all things being equal on average, like, do you think that if you had a 90% plus chance of killing 40 humans, and in one of the worst torturous existence that you could possibly imagine, do you think that on a utilitarian view, all things considered equal, I'm not talking about like on average, for the average consumer, for the average taste pleasure that a consumer engages in, when that flesh hits their taste buds, do you think that, what's your leaning? Do you think the leaning is like, oh, it's not a disutility for this to be taking place, or do you think that it is a disutility? Gun to the head, if you had to pick.
Me personally, I don't know. Depends on the number, but if we're talking beings with the same humans, with the same cognitive capacity of a chicken, controlling for everything else, I mean, a lifetime of eating those products, purchasing those products, on the utilitarian view, no, I think they would probably, if they're non-vegan, from what I've read, they would probably err on the side of positive utility when they compared the two, a lifetime of purchasing and consuming.
I just want to ask you one question here, because we can talk about the difference in utility. Like, is this something you would accept? Like, do you think that would be an okay thing on your view? Like, if you had a 90% chance of having humans like just engage in being tortured to death, have like 40 humans being tortured to death so you can like eat their flesh over the course of a lifetime?
If we're talking actual human beings, no. I mean,
we're talking no. We're talking don't change. We're talking human beings we're talking mentally handicapped human beings, actual mentally handicapped human beings.
No, I mean, if we're actual mentally handicapped human beings, that isn't the trait I would specify, though, right? So if you're asking me to specifically specify the trait, it would be cognitive capacity of a chicken existing as a species norm in a separate species. So they can look like humans, but I mean, they can be beings that resemble physically, the cognitive capacity of a chicken. So they can look like humans, but I mean, they can be beings that resemble physically the cognitive capacity of a chicken. So they can look like humans, but I mean, they can be beings that resemble physically the cognitive capacity of a chicken. So they can look like humans, but I mean, they can be beings that resemble physically the cognitive capacity of a chicken. So they can look like humans, but I mean, they can be beings that resemble physically the cognitive capacity of a chicken. So they can look like humans, but I mean, they can be beings that resemble physically the cognitive capacity of a chicken. So they can look like humans, but I mean, they can be beings that resemble physically the cognitive capacity of a chicken. So they can look like humans, but I mean, they can be beings that resemble physically the cognitive capacity of a chicken. So they can look like humans, but I mean, they can be beings that resemble physically the cognitive capacity of a chicken. So they can look like humans, but I mean, they can be beings that resemble human beings, but I mean, they would have the cognitive capacity of a chicken. Now, would I say that it's actually...
Wait a minute. When you say species norm, like, okay, wait. So I just want to get clarity on what you're saying. So I'm asking, so I asked you if this was the same case for humans. They were mentally handicapped humans, and there was a 92% chance that you would end up killing 40 of them in a very torturous way, a torturous existence. You're saying that let's just get an answer, like yes, or do you think there's something wrong with that? Yes or no?
Mentally disabled humans, yes, I do.
Okay, and do you think there's something wrong with doing it for chickens?
Yeah, I've said before that I find that the entire factory farm system, like, morally problematic, reprehensible even. But I mean, that's not all I'm talking about here, right? Is that there's this common understanding that when an individual purchases animal products, there's a 1-to-1 ratio in terms of their purchases. Not from you, I'm saying, just a common misunderstanding that I've seen. That their purchases line up exactly with the amount of animals killed. And so if we're just taking this case of broiler chickens, what I would say, if we actually look at the dynamics of broiler chicken production, and we look at the history of how production has moved in terms of
just before we get into that, you said that there's a misconception that their purchases roughly line up with the amount of animals killed. So that actually is, I don't know if that's a misconception. What I think you're trying to say is that what would have happened otherwise if their purchase was not there would have been a different number, because the purchases really do more or less line up with the animals killed. If you tallied the number of chicken purchases and you tallied the number of chickens killed, what goes in has to come out. Those numbers are going to roughly be equal.
Right. So if we're talking about the whole broiler chicken, I mean, that corresponds to 1 chicken killed. What I'm talking about, in the absence of those purchases, what would have happened in the subsequent production period?
No, and I agree. There's that misconception that what would have happened otherwise is misconceived. But regardless, I just don't think it makes a difference in terms of whether one ought to be vegan. Certainly on your view, like as you just said, you seem to think that there is something wrong with doing this.
With factory farm, yeah, absolutely. And
when the case of chicken, it's very over 99% of chickens are factory farmed. It's going to be very, very difficult to get a non-factory farm chicken.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
Okay. Not to mention we can name the trait with the quote unquote family farms, which I'm not even convinced they're far different than they're that different than factory farms. But anyway, okay, cool. So then what's the contention here is that what would be utility versus disutility, and I just would love to hear a utilitarian try to make the case that the taste bud pleasure of well, before we get into that, so let's just round up the table on what we agree on. So we agree that when we purchase a chicken, if someone is purchasing a chicken, the average consumer purchasing a chicken, they're doing something wrong. They're engaging in a lifestyle of purchasing chickens. That's a wrong thing, and they ought do something. They ought buy tofu or something other than the chicken. Do we agree?
Oh, I don't know. Well, no, it would depend on the outcome of their purchases, right? If an individual, let's just talk below even the average consumer. If it was the case that an individual spent a lifetime purchasing broiler chicken, some amount, let's say, but those purchases never really translated into any shift.
Yeah, but we're already
making production.
We're already factoring for that, Ans. I mean, look. So when you keep saying well, it depends on what the outcomes, that's just a trivially true thing. We understand that. That's why we're talking about when an individual engages in a lifetime of making these purchases. Our best estimate right now is that for the average consumer engaging in the lifetime of doing this, they have a 92% chance of killing anywhere between 1 and 900 chickens.
Yeah, that's fine. So, I was correcting that because I wasn't sure if you were factoring that in.
Yeah,
because purchasing a ticket is wrong. But let's just say that it would depend. How I would weight how wrong what they're doing is, I mean, it would depend on the number of chickens that wouldn't have been bred absent their 1 threshold purchase.
Yeah, but that's what we already discussed. Yeah, sir, we already agree on that. But then the question is now that, okay, given that we have our best estimate is that if you have, for an average consumer engaging in a lifestyle of doing this, you're going to have a 92% of killing anywhere between 1 and 900 chickens. Do you think that's a right or wrong thing? Do you think that we ought not do this, or it's not an issue?
My answer to that is yes. I think factory farm. I think the industry is wrong, right? I think probably not purchasing the products is a good thing. Do I put most of the blame on the individual consumer? I mean, that's a different question. But yes, I would agree that purchasing over a lifetime for the average consumer could potentially lead to this threshold event and cause some number of chickens to be bred into existence. I tend to estimate it on the lower end, but yeah, we could agree with that.
Okay, so we agree that that's something that is wrong for an individual to do, an individual engaging in a lifestyle of which results in a 92% chance of killing anywhere between 1 and 900 beings in a torturous way. Yeah. And so what is the, okay, cool. So what is the disagreement? Is there any disagreement that we have?
On this issue, I'm not sure. So let me just, yeah, we agree. I mean, I agree the industry is problematic. I tend to put more blame on industries than individuals like operating in a consumer society, but I mean, we can agree on everything that was just said.
That's compatible. Yeah, you could put more blame on the industry than the individual, but that's compatible with putting a high amount of blame on both.
Well, I would put far more blame on the industry than individuals, and I'm talking about.
That's also compatible with putting a high amount of blame on both.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm just specifying my own position in terms of where I put most of the blame. So I just wanted to see, do we also agree on this? An individual could subscribe to a 100% plant-based diet for most of their life, and then 1 year they could purchase and consume 30 broiler chickens, right? And I think the binomial calculation you conducted shows there's a 97% probability that their purchases won't be on the threshold. In other words, they won't actually have any impact at all on the chickens bred in the subsequent production period. We agree on that.
Let me just check the calculation I did. I'll scroll up because I want to get the words. I want to get the numbers as accurate as I can. Yeah, it would be 96.8 for an average consumer to not be on a thirst. So yeah, no, I agree. I agree on that. That an individual can live their an individual can do this and end up with a low probability of being on a threshold. Now that being said, even for 1 year, even again, just asking the question in the human context, like, would you be comfortable with having a 3.2% chance or whatever of torturing and killing 40 humans or something because you wanted to live this lifestyle for a year? Like, that sounds horrific to me. Does it sound horrific to you?
Well, I would just, in the context where there's a 97% probability, if we're talking, no. I mean, I would have the same evaluation if we had two possible worlds and we have these human beings, which have the cognitive capacity of a chicken, and we have chickens in the other possible world. If the individual purchases 30 chickens in 1 year and there's a 97% or 96% probability they don't land on the threshold, hence they don't actually influence the outcome. Let's just say they don't land on the threshold. Let's say we have knowledge of that. Would you still consider the purchaser?
Well, yeah, that's of course. If we're saying they didn't end up hitting that chance, sure. But that's like, again, it's like, for example, like if someone goes drunk driving, right, and it just so happens to be that they didn't end up crashing into anyone. Well, great. But that doesn't mean that we look at drunk driving as something that is not like a really shitty idea, because the whole point is that we don't know what the outcome is, right? So we don't know if you're going to crash into someone or not, and that's why we discourage drunk driving and we have laws against it. The whole point here is that when we're making the choice to engage in this lifestyle, we don't know what the outcome is. We know there's a non-trivial chance of doing something very horrible here.
Well, we know, I mean, based on those calculations, 96%
probability,
our estimate, right? I mean, it's likely that in that one case, we were talking about somebody who's plant-based most of the time, purchases during 1 year 30 broiler chickens. Yeah. There's a high probability they won't be on the threshold. They won't impact the outcome. I'm just wondering, on your view, even if you knew that they wouldn't impact the outcome, would you still blame the individual consumer?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I absolutely would. My normative view is not consequentialism. I think I'm not a utilitarian. I think utilitarianism is a horrifically insane view. I absolutely would place blame on that individual.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I should have said from the standpoint of a utilitarian, right? If we're talking about,
yeah. From a standpoint, yeah, no, sure. From a standpoint of a utilitarian, no, they would not. However, a utilitarian, prior to the action being taken, if the utilitarian didn't know the outcome, what I can tell you is that I don't think a utilitarian would say that this is something that's okay, because a utilitarian wouldn't want to engage in that risk.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. We've talked about the different utilitarians, right, who have different positions on that, but Olson is one. I mean, there's another one, Chignet is one. I mean, they seem to arrive at different conclusions about that when it comes to the average consumer and making purchases through factory farm circuits, right? But I suppose, yeah, you could like Singer, for example, I'm sure would take that position, even if it was just a small probability, and the outcome would just be even just one fewer chicken bred, would likely take the position that they shouldn't do it. But I suppose that's going to depend again.
Well, that's fine, but again, like the whole point I'm making here is that there's a difference between evaluating actions prior to knowing the outcome and making a retrospective evaluation on the action after all the effects of the outcome are known, right? You appreciate that distinction?
Yeah, I do. So I don't know if now is a good time to actually get into the broiler chicken industry or what we know about that. And
well, I don't see how. I mean, I looked at that data and I just really I really don't see how it's going to be relevant. Like, I don't see how it would supersede the estimates that were already presented, and I just don't see why. I just don't understand why we would transition to that. I mean,
okay, no, we don't have to. I'm simply pointing out that the trend here is that production keeps rising, right? Even when you have drops in per capita consumption, domestic consumption, and a large part of that is because of the export markets acting as a safety valve, and all the other factors we talked about. I'm just saying that I just don't see how that would. I'm simply saying the estimate in terms of the fewer chickens, the total number of fewer chickens bred for an individual who doesn't make a purchase on the threshold is likely going to be on the lower end, in my view. Probably not 900.
Yeah, I mean, even if it was like 50 or something, even if it's like 50 chickens or something like that, I just don't. It would seem crazy to me. Like, here's the thing. Here, like all the things you would consider as utilitarian, right? You would consider the following things. So you would consider the most obvious thing you would consider is the disutility of the tortuous existence of the chicken, right? So you add that to disutility. But there are other things that go into poultry industry that form disutility, or at least what most utilitarians would consider disutility. Environmental effects, which aren't as bad as cattle, but they are also worse than plant-based alternatives. And then the other thing, which however is not going to be as bad as would have happened otherwise, because if you're only doing 50 chickens, well, how much environmental harm is that really going to be?
Right, I was going to say that.
And then the other thing, which would be is a health differential. And so then you would have to look at if there's any evidence for disutility on a health differential if someone were to live a lifestyle eating white meat versus, and by white meat, I'm not talking about fish, I'm talking about chicken, versus plant-based alternatives.
Right, I agree with that. I think the environmental issue, as you pointed out, wouldn't really change. You would be looking at the individual impact, right, on the environmental damage. So it's not the industry in the aggregate. In terms of health, I guess that would depend on the individual as well. They'd have to look at their blood labs, monitor their health as a utilitarian to see whether or not,
Yes, I mean that's trivial. It's again that's one of those obvious things. But the whole question here is that okay, based on the data on average in the population, if we're making on a population level, I mean, because that's the only way we can really extrapolate to individuals. If we're trying to answer this question, what does the data say in terms of health, in terms of eating chicken versus plant-based alternatives? And if the answer is that there are more diseases, there's more suffering, diseases that presumably cause suffering involved in chicken consumption versus plant-based alternatives, that's a disutility that a utilitarian would consider. Because again, even if you may not be guaranteed, not every individual will be guaranteed to get those conditions, but if there's a higher chance, yes, the utilitarian will look at that chance because they don't know the future, and consider that into utility.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to get disagreeing with me on the health, effects of meat consumption. I just think it would differ partially depending on the utilitarian and the impact on their personal individual health. I think the utilitarian would look at how it's impacting their individual health, the evidence for that, and then weigh that against the consumption. Right?
But here's the problem here, Ans. Here's the this is a trivial true thing of utility. What utilitarian needs to make the case for at this point is this lifetime of taste bud pleasure is going to outscale any health effects that happen. It's going to outscale any the tortuous existence of those chickens that got tortured in some factory farm somewhere. And if they want to do that, make that case, they can. And even if that's true, I just take that to be a reductio to utilitarianism. Like, you can make the same case for raping individuals, right? Like, you can have some sort of like pedophile who wants to rape kids, and they can make the case like, well, if there was some industry that farmed kids and wanted to rape the kids, this pedophile may not actually be on the threshold. They're just going to have some chance of being on it. Maybe it's like 40 kids they'll end up raping over their lifetime, and they just really experience so much well-being from it. Like, this is the kind of argument you really need to make here.
Right. So a couple things. I agree with you in terms of the problems of utilitarianism as a normative ethic. In terms of, I will point out that the industries, you can swap them easily, right? The broiler industry with some other industry, a pedophilia, whatever that industry, a child porn industry. The utilitarian is obviously going to weigh suffering of an actual child more than a chicken, in my view. Right?
Mentally handicapped child. We can dispense with that very quickly. So mentally handicapped child that suffers the same degree as the chickens that get tortured there. I mean, and there's other pushback as well too. I mean, I don't even know if it's true that I actually don't know if it's true, because at least a child, I mean, there's psychological problems that will happen after, but there's no chicken psychologist that can ever help a chicken. We don't prescribe antidepressants to chickens. We don't give them therapy for what they went through. We just like torture them and kill them. I mean, so I actually don't even know, even if it wasn't like trait equalized, but even if we can make the case that it was, we'll just trait equalize the cognitive capacity. So, I mean, this is really still the territory you need to, but the type of argument that's being made here. Like, and I don't know how a utilitarian can make that case. It seems crazy, but even
some have, right? I mentioned some.
Yeah, I know they have. I still think it's crazy. I'd like to see how they're calculating utility then, which is always a problem in utilitarianism. Like, but still, like, I mean, certainly this is where it needs to go. It needs to go like, well, listen, I'm gonna rape these kids. Like, that's what I'm a utilitarian. I'm raping the kids. I get so much pleasure out of it, and I'm just not going to be on the threshold case. And if I am, well, it's a chance I'm willing to take, and I'm not going to. It's probably, my intuition is telling me it might be on the lower end of kids, from 1 to 900 kids that are going to be tortured for had I done otherwise.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I would evaluate that situation differently. We talked about suffering, right? I mean, I think it's clear. You think there's some issue here in terms of whether an actual child can, suffer to the same extent as a chicken, or that a chicken suffering might be equal. I don't know if maybe I misunderstood what you were saying earlier, but I mean, there clearly would be a qualitative difference there, right, in terms of suffering and how you would calculate that. So, I mean, just sticking with the broiler chicken industry, I think it's it changes the utility calculation as opposed to swapping it with actual children being raped in the industry.
All right, so just to be clear, the reason I'm not sure on the reason I'm equalizing things is because I'm not sure on, and the reason I'm not sure on the difference between those two cases is because there are disanalogies that go the other way. In other words, there are disanalogies that would indicate that a chicken may actually suffer more than the child. So, for example, in this industry, the child will get raped and they'll have psychological problems, but they're not going to have their bones broken the way chickens are. They're not going to have parts of their bodies chopped off without any anesthetic. They're also not going to be crammed in with other children like sardines, right? We can. There are certain things that go in terms of disutility the other way. And now the question is, what's worse than the other? I don't actually know the answer to that. Like, you'd have to like do some brain studying or whatever kind of shit. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm talking about all of that, right? Just based on what you do know in terms of the neurology of a chicken, even if you factor in all those conditions in terms of factory farming, what is their capacity to suffer and experience well-being and experience suffering? And then just even compare it to, a child or, an adolescent in general. I mean, I think based on, we can't know for sure.
It wouldn't be capacity. It would be actual suffering instantiated. Like, there's a difference. Like, you can have a being that has a capacity of like 1 million, but only instantiates like 100, right? And then you can have another being that has a capacity of 1,000 but instantiates like 101. Like,
the actual suffering and experience of actual suffering and experience of well-being, right? In terms of their neurology.
Yeah. And I don't think I know or the answer to that. And I think someone who pretends they do is, I just don't know what to say to that. Like, I'd ask for evidence. Like, what's the argument for that? Like here's the problem, right? Like the problem is like a child has a higher capacity to suffer, but it seems like a chicken might be suffering it seems like the child suffering might not be reaching as much of a cap of their suffering as a chicken is. Like a chicken in a factory farm, I would expect them to reach like closer to 100% of their suffering cap than a child in the scenario over their lifetime.
Right. So with suffering, I'm also actually not just talking about physical suffering, but just emotional, mental suffering, and that type of well-being.
No, I'm talking about that as well. Yeah.
Okay. Well, when you factor in, rational thought, and then you use that layer to calculate the type of a mental and emotional suffering a human being would experience because of the presence of rational thought, conceptualizing what's happening, I think that adds a different layer of mental and emotional.
Sure, adds a different layer. I just don't know if it wins out or not, and I don't know how you can make the case that it does or doesn't.
Well, I mean, you can just ask, the question in terms of a hypothetical. If you're on your way, let's say, to a gas chamber or to a slaughterhouse as a human being, and you know exactly what's happening, and you have the ability to, reflect on it, to ponder it, and to just try to calculate now how that would actually impact your emotional and mental suffering versus being an animal and
having your bones broken versus being dragged there with your bones broken and your beak chopped off. Like I'm
talking about just being transported in the truck, not knowing, right, exactly what's happening. Sure, the stress and anxiety is going to be high, but that layer of mental and emotional suffering
Ans, that's not just the extent of it, though. That's not just, you're not just being transported. That's not just what's going on in these chicken industries. Like
I know. I know. I was talking solely about it. That in this moment, I'm talking about solely about the layer of emotional and mental suffering.
Right. But the problem is you have to consider all of it. Like it's not. Yes, I agree that there's a different layer of that. However, on the lower layers, the degree seems more severe. And what wins out, I don't know, and I don't think you don't know either.
Right. No, I was actually talking about just exchanging chickens for human beings in this thought experiment, so encompassing everything, the physical and the emotional and the mental well-being. I'm saying if you compare all of that, right, based on cognitive capacity of humans versus chickens, there are different layers of suffering where even if you include the physical, would probably lead me at least, you can never know for sure, as you pointed out, but to weight the suffering of a human being higher than that of a chicken. I mean, I don't know if you actually would be hesitant about that, but to me it seems, straightforward, right?
Well, no, I don't think it's straightforward at all. I mean, if you look at, I agree, the suffering is terrible in both cases. But if you want to make the case that one is worse than the other, you'd really need an argument for that, or some sort of evidence. And just pointing to the things you pointed to doesn't get there. But anyway, I don't need to go down this rabbit hole because I think it's just as crazy if you just equalize with the same degree of suffering. You just say there are humans that are mentally handicapped to the same cognitive capacity of a chicken. Like, are you okay? Like, you need to, where this is going to go is the same place. Like,
I know. No, the utilitarian would have the exact same evaluation of that situation versus the broiler chickens, right? I would say there wouldn't be a difference. I mean, if you control for that cognitive capacity.
What do you think? Yeah, what do you think about a utilitarian who makes that case? Do you think that what would you say? Do you agree with them? Do you think they're like being reasonable, or do you think that like they have this crazy view?
I'm not a utilitarian either, so generally I think there's massive problems with utilitarianism, so I wouldn't evaluate most situations based on that calculation. When it comes to actually non-human animals, probably looking at well-being versus disutility is in my view, probably how I'd want to evaluate it, just because in terms of rights violations and violating the rule, it would be difficult to use that for me in the non-human animal case. I'm not convinced that those type of rights should be extended, right?
Wait, so if you're just going to look at utility and disutility, how are you different from a utilitarian?
No, in most situations I wouldn't. I'm talking about in the case of purchasing products over a lifetime, right? That's probably just because purchasing the product for me and biting into the meat that's already dead doesn't violate any rule I have, and it doesn't seem to me to be a rights violation either. So I'd want to know exactly how those actions over a lifetime actually impacted well-being at the other end to inform the decisions. And I mean, I don't know if we need to get into all this, but my purpose in having this discussion was just to point out that there is this misconception, which I think you agree with, that when people make these purchases of animal products, it's not at all as simple as simply saying that one purchase equals a subsequent killing in the next production period, right? And you agree with that.
I'll just rephrase it real quick, because if you add up the purchases and the killings, those are, again, it's the same point I made before.
Absence of a purchase does not automatically
that would have happened. the key word is that would have happened otherwise. The key phrase.
Right. That would have happened otherwise. You're right. Yeah. Okay. That counterfactual. So yeah,
I agree. There is that misconception, and I just take that to be no. But so what I would say, I'll say a couple things. So the first thing I'll say is like, okay, I agree that if that misconception should be dispensed with, because we don't like to say inaccurate things. What I would say is that the rhetoric that should be used is that what you're doing creates demand for individuals to be tortured and killed, because that's unambiguously true.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I mean, creates demand. That just sounds like there's direct causality still. I mean, it adds to the demand that's there, but how you are actually impacting the outcome based on the creation of that demand is a different issue again, right?
Yeah, I don't know if it's direct. I don't know if it implies direct causality. I agree it implies causality, which is true. There is a causal connection there. There's no question about it. When you purchase these products, you are in causal connection for those individuals to be tortured and killed. Now, it may not have happened otherwise. That's true. That's actually also compatible for you to be in causal connection with those individuals being killed.
Right. I'm talking about in the absence of that purchase with the same number of individuals in the
I understand
period.
The distinction.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah.
I'm just using rhetoric to that is just not saying false things. So when you when I say creates demand for them to be killed, I don't see anything inaccurate about that rhetoric.
Yeah, that's fine. Creating demand. Yeah, I'm fine with that. Your purchases create demand, which is linked to the operations of factory farms and the animal ag industry. Yeah, that's fine. But so you agree, certain vegan activists, when they use the rhetoric that we're talking about here, you would agree that's problematic, that they shouldn't be doing that generally.
If what their rhetoric is saying is that every purchase they make kills an individual that would not have been killed otherwise, I agree that's problematic.
Right, and I mean, a lot of them, if you listen to them, I don't know if they've thought it out, but they're probably not thinking about it in those terms at all, right? I mean, you just hear how some of them talk. They actually posit that a purchase by an individual is responsible for one additional being tortured and killed in the subsequent production period. They seem to specify very direct causal mechanisms, right, between the absence of a purchase and what would have happened otherwise. And
wait. Let's just break those two terms apart. Like I always need to make the distinction between a causal connection and the what would have otherwise happened connection, because those are very two different things.
No, what would have happened otherwise? We talked about, right? An individual not on the threshold, had they not made that purchase, they're not going to impact the decision of the grocer or the distributor or the integrator or the producer in one fashion or another. Yeah, so that's what I'm talking about.
And, right. But here's the thing. Like the reason I'm still trying to make the distinction here is because there are individuals that there's rhetoric that would imply there's a causal connection without implying that it would have happened otherwise, and that's still accurate.
In terms of creating demand, yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, okay. So so we agree, fine. So we agree that this, so I don't see anything that we don't agree on at this point with respect to utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is just another reason to consider it a very problematic view. I do think a utilitarian, vegan utilitarian can still push back just based on everything. Like they can try to make a case, and it still seems to me it would be very hard to make the case that for any substantial amount of people that their taste bud pleasure would outweigh the horrors in factory farms and in combination with health outcome differentials and everything like that. But even if they could, I just take that to be a problem with utilitarianism. It was just it's the same thing as the rape justification thing. So I think we can close that up. So the things we agree on is that so Budolfson is okay. So what the misconception to correct is that every purchase you make will change a grower, change an individual at the one-to-one level that would have happened otherwise. That's a misconception on the one side. On the other side, there's a misconception that over a lifetime nothing will happen, right? Like the whole Budolfson thing that he said in that paper.
Yeah, I will agree with you. Yeah, so I went back, looked at that paper, and I'll agree with you on this. There is too much conceptual analysis. I would like to see more empirical work done on this issue, so I think we'd agree on that.
He threw out a number too. He threw out. He said it was far less than 1 in 5,000.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember the exact number, but yeah, he used that hypothetical about producing T-shirts, and he threw out some numbers there. And well, you're right; it was heavy on conceptual and theoretical analysis with not enough empirical work. So I would agree with you that that's.
No, he made a further claim rather than the hypothetical insurance. The claim he made further is that when it comes to chickens, the chance of being on the threshold or making a threshold difference is, quote, would be far less than 1/5,000.
Okay, I don't remember. I'll have to go check, but yeah, he might have done that. But Alston did that with chick. Okay, yeah, okay, I'll check that. But either way, like, I agree, there's a lot of conceptual analysis there with not enough empirical work. So it's
well, not just the problem is not just conceptual analysis. I mean, I agree that's a problem, but the problem is like a similar rhetoric problem on the other side is what I'm saying. So like, just as you can say there's a rhetoric problem, like each individual that is purchased is an individual killed that wouldn't happen otherwise. There's also misleading rhetoric on the Budolfson side when he says like the chance of being on the threshold is less than 1/5,000 in the chicken industry. Like,
yeah, I'll agree with that. I'll just also point out though that Budolfson's piece, all of this non-efficacy argumentation, it emerged as a response to Singer's vegan utilitarianism or consequentialism, and so they're essentially trying to push back against that. And I think that's how we have to situate some of their rhetoric and how they couch their claims. But yeah, that's fine.
Either way, the rhetoric is misleading. Like either on that side as well, regardless of the reasons.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Singer's rhetoric was misleading as well, though, in his initial work on this, on what he considered to be the moral responsibility of vegan or vegetarian consequentialists, right? And so they're responding to that. But yeah, I have no problem saying with
if Singer was, if by misleading you mean that he was saying that each individual purchased is an individual killed or something like that, then I agree. If not, then I'd have to look into the specific of what Singer was saying.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So now let's talk about your view, because like I think we agree on this. I think we've come to agreement. So we agree there's misleading rhetoric on both sides. In terms of whether a utilitarian would take the view, I really do think most utilitarians, like if they like looked at all the data, I think there would just be a fringe minority of utilitarians that, like, after fully analyzing the data, would say like, oh, actually there's more utility like eating the chickens. Like, I could be wrong about that, but that's my intuition. That's my leaning intuition. Anyway.
Okay, I have no way of knowing that, right? But yeah, I mean, I'll just point out there are non-vegan utilitarians who are trying to make the case that it's,
of course,
from the standpoint of utility, yeah, it's fine. Like, it washes out the whatever impact would happen in terms of the suffering on the production end, because they view it would be so minuscule that it wouldn't cancel out a lifetime of purchases and consumption. But I mean, I really don't know.
Okay, and now what is your view on this? What is your view on it? Like, and again, don't say in response, well, it depends on what the outcomes are. Like obviously it does, but like, what's your view on doing things like, living a life eating animal products?
It's problematic on my view. Do I do it? Yeah, I haven't gone vegan, but it is problematic. I won't pretend it's not. Factory farming is reprehensible. I'm not the average. So 30 broiler chickens in a year, that's not me. I've never done that. I've never purchased that. I don't think I've ever done that even in 1 year. So I don't know what the impact of my purchases are really exactly.
Well, we can estimate it, actually. We can estimate it right now. How many chickens do you think you purchased in a year?
I mean, so I have to think about this. Probably on the order of maybe 5 or 10.
Okay, so if you continue living your life, if you don't want to without doxing yourself or anything, like, you can just give an age. Like, you don't have to tell me if you don't want to say how old. Yeah, go ahead.
That's late 30s. Yeah.
All right, late 30s. Okay, cool. So you would eat. Okay, so 5 chickens per day, and let's say so you're late 30s, 40, 50, 60, 70. Let's say you live 40 more years or something. 40 more years or whatnot. Or I don't actually, there's increasing lifespan as well. So over a lifetime, if you continue eating, if you assuming you have, like, if you're going to live a long, healthy life of like 60, 70, 80, 80s, if you're going to live in your 80s, you have like 50 more years to live. then you would have like a 25% chance of killing 1 to 900 chickens. If you're going to live a really long life, into like the 90s or whatever, you'd have about a 30% chance of killing that amount of 1 to 900 chickens. Yeah, if you eat if you are consuming five chickens per year at that rate. So yeah, I mean, this is not like, yeah, I mean, that's not an inconsequential probability of like doing something horrific.
Yeah, I mean, those I'll accept those numbers. In terms, then we have to ask, had I not made those purchases, what would have been the impact in terms of the number of chickens not bred? I think it would be on the lower end, probably like 1 to 10, based on what I've seen in terms of the industry and how they structure production decisions.
I don't know how you're getting. I don't know.
I don't think it would be 900, right? The 900.
No, I don't think it would be 900. But like, you don't have to go to 1 to 10. Like, you can go like 40, 50. Like, how do you know it's not like 40 or 50? Like, when you say like 40 or 50, like that sounds like really, really fucking bad. Like,
yeah, 40 and 50. But below that, right? Then it becomes more of a gray area. I think if we're talking 1 to 10, I don't know, but look, let's say it's 40 or 50. I mean, I agree it's problematic. I guess the difference in how we approach these things is I generally don't, like to look at what the consumer is doing. I think it's industries, and I think it's generally advertising, and it's how corporations and industries try to convince consumers that the responsibility is solely theirs. And then when you actually have these type of discussions in terms of activist circles, I'm talking all activism, not just veganism. I've done my share of activism in other areas, and just focusing on consumers to the detriment of really putting the blame on industries and on the companies that are engaging this is problematic. And maybe that's a difference in terms of how we would approach this. But like looking at each consumer, doing these calculations, is not how I would actually approach the issue, right? I'd be looking at how the meat industry operates generally, how they make these decisions, how
these things aren't incompatible. I don't see how the incompatibility or the mutual exclusivity between these two things. Like, it could very well be that we should be focusing on the industries, and it could also very well be that an individual who engages in a 25% chance of torturing 40 individuals over their lifetime they're doing something that's reprehensible.
Yeah, that's fine. And I said, veganism is if you're actually going to have to engage in that activism, it's a good thing to be vegan. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't look at it just from a utilitarian standpoint when we're talking about activism and the impact you can have. I'm just saying, I guess, even doing these type of calculations, looking at how an individual impacts production, is just, I think, more energy should be put in terms of the supply side. And the reason this might not be you, but from what I've seen in terms of vegan activist circles, at least on YouTube and the really public figures, I see far more emphasis placed on what the individual should be doing, right? Than as opposed to how to actually dismantle industries.
Okay, cool. But let me just ask you this: like, I just want perfect clarity then? Like, so on your view, do you think that you're doing something wrong when you purchase 5 chickens a year?
Based on those, it's morally problematic. I wouldn't say wrong, just based on those numbers you gave me. 5 chickens a year, if you look at the probability in terms of how it impacts well-being, if I ever actually cross that threshold, right, it would depend on all those things. But it's morally problematic for anybody to purchase and consume animal products, given the context of factory farming.
Okay, do you think you should avoid it?
I think we should avoid it as much as possible, yeah. But again, I wouldn't generally think so much about what the individual should do, right? That's a difference between us. I think it's just too much.
Okay, so you think that you should avoid purchasing the 5 chickens a year?
Yeah, I think it's morally problematic. Okay. I mean, I wouldn't say I wouldn't say any individual who does it is doing something wrong necessarily. It's morally problematic. Right. It's more of a gray area.
Okay, wait. Would you say that if someone's purchasing humans, they're not doing something wrong, they're just doing something morally problematic?
No, look, again, if we do name the trait and I specify my trait stack, and then we control everything between the two possible worlds, the moral evaluation would be exactly the same. If there are beings who are being bred and tortured, who have the cognitive capacity of a chicken, and they're, that exists as a species norm. This is just my trait stack, and you have that possible world. Everything else is held constant. It would be the same evaluation, right? It's morally problematic. I think that if you look at the industry, it's reprehensible. In terms of how much blame I would put on.
So what's the answer though? Like, you're just telling me everything's going to be the same, but let's actually hear the answer. So let's say there's let's say there's humans that are mentally handicapped that are being bred. Would you say that if someone is purchasing 5 of them every year, that they're doing something wrong, or would you say they're doing something morally problematic?
In that scenario where everything else is controlled for it, I'd say it's morally problematic. Yeah, when I look at individual actions, I look at things like socialization, cultural indoctrination. If all those things are held constant between the two scenarios, I don't see how the moral evaluation would be any different. I mean, it's reprehensible what happens.
Okay, wait. So just to be clear, so are they not doing something wrong?
They're doing something morally problematic. I don't know.
What's the distinction? Can you give me the distinction between, like, when you say wrong versus morally problematic? What I don't understand the distinction.
For me, wrong means it's something that's is first of all reprehensible, and they should not engage in that action. And if they do continue to engage in that action, I mean, we can draw certain conclusions about their character and the type of person they are. I wouldn't make that type of a judgment in these scenarios because of all the other factors that go into this.
Okay, so when someone, okay, and by let me just get, by morally problematic, what do you mean?
Morally problematic just means that they're engaging in actions in the context of an entire industry and cultural indoctrination. And while it would be best if they didn't engage in that action, I wouldn't actually make a judgment about them if they continue to do it because of all those other factors.
So to be clear, then, if someone is purchasing the mentally handicapped, and I'm not equalizing anything else right now, so don't say if everything was equalized. Like, just from what I'm asking you, if there were mentally handicapped individuals that were being farmed, and you purchase 5 of them a year, would you consider that, or someone purchases 5 of them a year, would you consider that individual doing something wrong?
They're a separate species, right? So they're a separate species existing as a species, and that cognitive capacity exists as a species norm. It would be the same evaluation that I would have.
Okay. So it would be a different. Well, it would be a different evaluation because there's different species norm cognitive capacities. I think you meant to say there's a different evaluation.
No, and if I specify the traits, the cognitive capacity would be the equivalent of a broiler chicken, right? And
in these individuals, right? In these, not in these humans as a whole, but in these specific humans, these mentally handicapped humans.
No, but my trait stack is that they exist as a separate species, right? And that cognitive capacity exists as a species norm. So at that point, they're not actually human beings; they're part of the separate species.
Yeah. Oh, I see. So you would just consider a difference. Okay, so let me see what. So the trait stack is what? So the trait stack is, let's write it out. So what is it? Let's go one by one. Actually, let's go all stack by stack. So what is it again?
Cognitive capacity, similar to a chicken, existing as a species norm that was established through evolutionary divergence.
Okay. Cool. So when it comes to these mentally handicapped individuals, right? Let's say we have this mentally handicapped individual that are being tortured or whatnot. Let's just say that this mentally handicapped individual, you found out that let's just say you woke up one day, right? And the intelligence of humans were like, it was a whole dream that everyone had like high cognitive capacity. Let's just say in reality, only 49% of humans had this like high cognitive capacity as a species norm, right? So like you wake up tomorrow and then you realize like everything you were realizing before about humans, like not everything, but a whole bunch of things was just completely misguided. Like you were just dreaming. So you wake up, and in this world you wake up in, it turns out that only 49% of humans have this high cognitive capacity, and 51% of humans are mentally handicapped like chickens.
Okay, in this scenario, can the 49% still breed and produce non-fertile offspring with the 51%?
Oh, wait a minute. Now I don't see the relevance here based on this stack you gave me.
No, I said species norm established through evolutionary divergence, right? You're thinking of species norm maybe as what the average can do at any snapshot in time. That's not how I would define species norm, because then you get into these other problematic.
What do you mean by species norm?
Something that's a heritable trait that has been established through evolutionary divergence.
Yeah. Right? So let's just say, yeah, sure. So let's just say it turns out that for the species of humans, for whatever reason, it turned out that there was a heritable, like, because certain species that are in the same species have like different frequencies. Have you ever heard of like, there's a specific type of selection in evolution that occurs in the same species that actually gives like different phenotypes to a different like percentage of the population.
Yeah,
whatever evolution. Yeah. So let's just say it was like that for humans. You wake up and it turns out that 49% of the humans were high cognitive capacity, and the other 51% of humans were just chickens in capacity. Like, now is it not wrong to purchase these humans?
It depends on whether or not between the 51 to 49%, right? Do they have family members in that 51%? You know, are there other type of relationships that go on?
Well, wait a minute. Like, none of that was in your trait stack before, so you're adding new traits now.
Well, no, I'm just, look, the trait stack for me, though, it has to be a separate species where that level of cognitive capacity, the type of scenario you're giving me, it just seems odd because it seems like you're part of that thing.
It dealt with everything you just mentioned. No, that's not entail. I don't see how that's entailed at all. There are plenty of species that have variously different traits and different frequencies. Like, evolution does this all the time. I don't see how a new species is entailed.
No, that's just what I specified, right?
Wait, what is your? Are you using like a definition? Are you using like a proprietary definition of species or something? Like,
no, I said earlier, species for me just means, so if they can't breed and produce non-fertile offspring with the other.
So to be clear, like so the individuals, these humans, before we're getting into that stuff, so let's just say that these individuals, these 51% of humans, right? Let's say they were fertile. Like, what would your answer be then?
My answer to, they were fertile, and they could.
Let's say they're fertile. They can produce viable. Yeah.
With the other 49%, if they can do this.
Yeah.
Yeah, then I'd generally be. I mean, I would treat them the way you treat mentally disabled human beings now. Cool. I mean, I think. But let me just say that.
Wait. No, don't. Ants, come on. Like, wait 1 second, because we're almost here. We're almost here. So now let's say someone comes and makes them not fertile, or they're unfertile. Now, is it wrong to purchase them?
Yeah, I would say it's the same thing that I said with the chickens. It's problematic. It's morally wrong. I would focus more on the industry.
Yeah, no, I got you. So just to be clear, the difference between it being wrong and not being wrong, and being in a category other than being wrong, of purchasing these humans, is whether or not they're fertile or not. Like, do I have that right?
No, No. I said family. Look, if in the scenario we have 49% that are of normal cognitive capacity, right? 51% that have the cognitive capacity of a chicken, right? Mm-hmm. And in this scenario, the 49% cannot breed with the 51%, right? And
51% can't breed, yeah.
Right. I would say in that scenario, I mean, leaving aside the issue as to whether they have family members, relationships with those other beings, the way we do with mentally disabled individuals now, I would say in that scenario, I would make the same moral judgment I do with broiler chickens. If we assume everything else remains constant in terms of the industry, in terms of how they're being bred and how they're being tortured by these companies, my focus would actually be on that industry. I would put very little.
I understand that you said on like the individual is doing. Yeah, we don't disagree on whether the focus. Like, okay, fine, I understand that. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the individual doing something wrong. So I just want to get this clear. So if we hold everything else equal, except like the only thing we're changing between these two scenarios, where there's this torturous industry just torturing and killing all of these humans that are mentally handicapped, these 51% of them. The difference between if we change the one proposition, which is that they are fertile, it is the case that they are fertile, versus it is not the case that they are fertile, then it is not. That makes the difference between it being wrong and it not being wrong for an individual to purchase these individuals?
No, that's not. I was just replicating the conditions we have now with broiler chickens. I would say what the individual is doing. And no, hold on. In both situations, broiler chickens and the scenario, the individual making the purchase is engaging in morally problematic behavior. If everything else is held constant.
I didn't ask if it was morally problematic. I
said I would have the exact same judgment in that scenario as I do with a.
I want an answer to the question. That's like,
no, it's morally problematic, not morally wrong for the.
Wait. So if they couldn't, so let's just get this straight. So let's say that they were. So let's say they could breed, right? Let's say they were fertile. Is it wrong or is it morally problematic?
It's morally problematic. In the situation, so if it was actually, so listen, in this scenario, the difference between you and I, perhaps, is that I would say all focus should be on the urgency of getting out there in the streets and destroying the industry that's doing it.
I wouldn't. You said this already. I'm not like.
Yeah. Well, this is my answer. I mean, you keep going back to the same thing. Look,
no, because you're not answering. You're not answering what we're talking about. Like here's like the question I'm trying to get is to what. Like here's the thing. You said it was wrong in the case where it's just straight up mentally handicapped humans. Then you said. Then at some point you're saying it's morally problematic. I'm trying to get to what proposition is changing to change your answer from wrong to morally problematic. I'm not interested.
Oh no, sorry. Yeah. Okay, sorry. No, in this context, if we're talking about individual purchases in that fashion, I would say it's morally problem. I would have the same evaluation, morally problematic in that.
Okay, so for humans, if an individual is purchasing humans, mentally handicapped humans that are being chopped up and tortured, you would say that it is not the case the individual is doing something wrong. You would say it's the case the individual is doing something morally problematic, right?
Yes, and everything else is held constant. Yes.
Okay, wait. When you say everything else is held constant, I don't know what that means. I don't know what else you're doing.
In terms of the industry, in terms of the company, how they operate, cultural indoctrination that exists now, all of those things. Yeah.
Okay. So if you want to say that someone is that an individual purchasing humans from industries like human flesh and consuming it, that individual is not doing something wrong. That's fine. That seems like a crazy view to me.
Look, I understand that's where. Okay, sorry. Go ahead, finish.
Yeah, just so like the individual. So you could continue doing this ad infinitum. Like, is there any amount of purchases that an individual can do before you would say it's wrong? Let me just ask you that. Like, let's say an individual would live forever and just keeps purchasing humans. Like, is there any point the individual is doing something wrong?
In terms of their impact on the outcome, yeah. That's why we specified.
No, I'm not asking in terms of the impact. I'm saying on your view, would you say the individual is doing something wrong?
On my view, I'm saying it would depend on the impact. That's why we specified earlier on the average consumer.
Okay, so then what's your answer? So they're saying, okay, we're saying for the same impact. Okay, so we're saying for the same, like that same 5% chance to five humans a year, this individual is purchasing and eating. Is he doing something wrong?
So for the same situation, again, it would be morally problematic. I wouldn't condemn them for in that scenario, in that hypothetical, in that possible world.
He's doing it for a million years. If he's doing it for a billion years, is he doing something wrong?
No, even if you extended a billion years, if they're making these purchases and everything else that I specified remained the same, right? I need to emphasize that just in case people, forget that component of it. My answer would be the same. It's morally problematic. And I would say the same thing about somebody who's purchasing certain items, which they know is produced through child slave labor in the Congo, right? Cobalt. If they would continue purchasing those products for a billion years, and they knew, no, it would be the exact same evaluation.
No, that's not good. Okay, we can have, all right, we can set up a third debate if you'd like for the symmetry breakers between factory, what's it called, sweatshops and stuff like that, and
not sweatshops. That's why
child labor,
said child slave labor.
Yeah, sure. Industries that are accused of having child slave labor.
I'm not making a Bosch argument here. I just want to be clear about that. It's different.
You're not making a what?
A Bosch type of argument here, where I say all consumption.
What's the distance? Okay, no, I'm not. Yeah, no. I understand. We can. Well, whether it's Bosch or not, whether it's Bosch level or not, in terms of being Bosch identical. We can set up, if you'd like, we can set up a third debate. But what I just want to get clarity, because I do think this I do think this topic is that topic is really low level, but we can do part 3 if you'd like. But what I really want,
it would be sure. Go ahead. I would be making different arguments than Bosch, so it wouldn't be
no.
the
All right,
thing
sure, that's fine. We can do that as well, because I'm not convinced that those two things are analogous. But anyway, so okay, so just so we're clear, like an individual can ad infinitum, if all those conditions about the industry were the same, make individual purchases, and based on the binomial probability distribution, they will infinitely, they will cause infinite suffering. They will cause infinite individuals to be slaughtered and killed, just if we continue to extend the timeout. And you would say for all points in time, they did not do something wrong. Is that right?
Infinite suffering. Where do we get that? Oh, because you're talking about it extends indefinitely into the future.
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say they continue doing this for an extended period of time into the future. Yeah. And we're talking about those beings that we specified, similar cognitive capacity to broiler chickens, etc. Mm-hmm. Everything else is held confident. I would say it's the exact same evaluation that I would do if it was just we go back to the chicken scenario. Morally problematic for the individual.
So here's the problem I have, Ans. The problem on your view that I have is that on your view, you would not say an individual is wrong for causing infinite suffering of infinite individuals, infinite suffering of infinite minds, and you would say that individual is not doing something wrong. Like, if you have a view like that, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I don't know how anyone would be convinced of a view like this.
Well, I understand that's your position and you feel that way, but I would just urge everybody who, thinks it's a crazy view to just look at some of the classical political economy literature. The classical political economists made exactly this argument when they were talking about individuals integrated into the circuits of capitalism, right? If you go back, this is why people like Ricardo Marx focused very little on consumption and far more on production and distribution, because the emphasis was placed at a completely different level than what you're talking about here. So I understand why people would come across thinking it's a crazy view, even a psychotic view. That's fine. My focus would just be on production, distribution. And I just look at things differently when we're talking about individuals integrated into the circuits of capitalism and their purchasing decisions and the type of systems, they were born into. So, I mean, that's just a difference in how any of
that I just don't see how any of that deflates the problem at the individual level. Like, so yes, we can focus on both of these things. They're both they're tangential to each other. They're both important problems, but I don't see how the problems.
Well, to be honest, I haven't heard a lot of people focusing on those other issues, right? That's one of the reasons I was motivated or inspired to have this discussion on this topic with you, because I see a lot of focus on the individual, especially among vegan activists and other activists as well. I actually don't want to just single out vegans, and very little focus on the actual structures, companies, industries, unless the person is already coming from that type of a background where they focus on those issues. Right, so that's actually the reason I'm pointing these things out. So
I'm not sure if that's true. I mean, there's a whole bunch of activism that relates to First of all, I'm not sure that's true. There's a whole bunch of plant-based companies that are popping up, whether it's Impossible or Beyond, or whether there's money being funded to lab-made meat on an industrial level. There's all sorts of critique on whether it be the conditions of animals in these industries or the people themselves in these industries. I mean, there's a whole bunch of documentaries and videos about the individual, like meat packers and whatnot. But regardless, the point that's tangential to the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is just that whether there is enough focus on the industry or not just seems irrelevant to whether how wrong an individual is doing something, or how unwrong an individual is, or whether it's right or wrong for an individual, whether it's wrong or not wrong for an individual to do something that seems very horrific. I just don't see how it's relevant, how that deflates it at all.
Well, it is, because when we're talking about in the context of a consumer society where all sorts of other issues are involved, then it does make a difference, right? How morally responsible we're willing to say the consumer needs to, or how to what extent we're willing to morally condemn the individual consumer. All of this is in the context of consumer actions, right? Not individual actions of direct cause and outcome in terms of how they're inflicting harm. I'm talking about purchasing decisions. And in that context, I mean, I follow a line of political economists who place the emphasis on these other industries and don't even make any findings in terms of the moral condemnation that should be placed on the individual level or on consumers. So it's just a different school of thought, I guess.
I'm not saying, no, you could say it's a different school of thought, but I'm not seeing how it exempts one from causing infinite suffering for infinite minds. Like, so you can say like, oh, I like to place the emphasis on the industry and not the individual. Okay, that's fine, but that doesn't answer like the question of how somehow an individual who is knowingly and willingly engaging in causing infinite suffering of infinite minds is somehow not doing something wrong. Like,
I mean,
and so, if I don't know what it means to, like, let me just ask you this, like, when you say wrong, like, do you think like it's something that they ought, like, what does that mean to you? Is it something that they ought not do? Do you think there's like oughts, like they're a thing? I take it to mean that if something is wrong, we ought not do it. Like, do you have a different conception?
No, with wrong, that's similar to the definition I gave with wrong versus morally problematic, remember? Yeah, so by wrong, that's what I would generally say. And I would also, I would go further and say I would morally condemn an individual for failing to cease whatever activity it is that I'd say is morally wrong.
So you don't think an individual, so do you think that individuals who consume 5 chickens a year should stop consuming 5 chickens a year?
Ideally, yes, I should too. But would I say that I'm morally wrong and using the definition we use for not doing it? No, it's morally problematic. I mean, we've been over this, right? So it's just going to be the same answer.
All right, cool. So they ought. So you agree? So just so we're clear to everyone, like, you agree people ought to be vegan, presumably.
Yes, I think veganism is a morally superior movement to
Okay. And you think I
have very different views when it comes to the predator issue. Maybe we can discuss that sometime. But in the context of individuals purchasing these items at factory farm meat, yeah.
Okay. And you think that if someone is but you don't think that if someone causes like infinite suffering of infinite minds through this sort of method, through this sort of industry, that they are doing something worthy of condemnation?
At the individual level, the consumer in that hypothetical, I would have the same evaluation, morally problematic.
Okay. So yeah, that's the, I guess that's the difference here. Like, I just don't see how I could ever get on board with a view like that, and I just don't see how the difference in focus in any of this literature somehow absolves the individual of something that's condemnation worthy. That's the difference here.